Ms. Mahan, can we do this afternoon?
Yes, majority of the board does.
Okay. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Shotwell?
I move that we approve the agenda, the modified agenda.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, all right, is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And all opposed? Motion has carried to add closed session to the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Potts. Okay, all right. Next item is the presentation, item C, and we will turn that over to Dr. Warner. Can you get this ball rolling for us?
Yeah, I'm going to be real brief.
And I'll do this.
Mr. Curtis Ellswick is on Zoom with you. He's Senior Vice President for Skanska. Vince, I want to make sure I say it right, Maresca is here, who's the boots on the ground for the Mecklenburg County High School, Middle School project. He's here as well. And Jim and your team, you're ready to roll?
Very good. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
We can hear you.
Okay. I'd like to share my screen. Can you see my screen okay now?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Excellent. Let's, I first want to thank the school board for agreeing to meet with us. We have been working, and doing what we can, but before we get too far along, we feel like we need to meet with you and verify some things, hopefully learn some things from you, and just be sure we're on the right track. We have a number of our team on call with us today. Steve Lunt, who is our studio leader here in Charlottesville, will be making part of the oral presentation today. Annette McDaniels, who's a project manager, is on call. And of course, Paul Clee. And you know Paul, he was there on August 25th. Paul worked on the open grade solution that we made for the school a couple of years ago. Our consultants are listed there at the bottom. We did, just point out for the full benefit of the school board, make one change from our submission. We're working with SIP engineering for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. And we're working with NICOS for food service for kitchen design. Some things we'd like to cover today. As I was mentioning, we've made a lot of assumptions. And we just want to be sure that our thinking kind of matches yours. We have a conversation about that. We want this to be a dialogue. Instead of talking to you, we want to talk with you so that we can be sure we understand what we want from you in school. A couple of unknowns that we'd like to address today. Gymnasium, auditorium, CTE classes, and we want to show you some building concepts. Not that these are finished building designs, but we've looked at how we might organize a new high school on the Power Park. So, as we understand it, your current enrollment, I believe, is 14, is it 72 or 75, Dr. Warner? But it's under 1,500, and the county's population has been declining. We'd like to see that change, but until it does, if we can build a school large enough for the current situation, the trends continue, it will be large enough. But it's our intention to incorporate a strategy where you could accommodate more students with the hope that the plans of the industrial development group will pay off and will be in Halifax County. We have been assuming that educationally that we will provide some collaboration space and teacher planning in the building. If that's not right, we'd like to know about that pretty quickly because it's a different design. We can't kind of wait till we get the construction drawings and verify that. We need to verify that right out of the box. Once you have both CTE and comprehensive education, what's going on with CTE is something we want to talk about. They can do a lot with the Southern Virginia Higher Ed Center, but how much and which classes are going to be where is very important. We have heard in the past from some of the school board members that one of the goals would be to integrate your educational spaces so that students would not cluster by groups. And what do I mean by that? To the greatest extent possible, we're looking at locating some of the CTE classes interspersed with the academic spaces. And we're not creating a science wing, we put science rooms on everything so that all students will have opportunities to meet each other in a meeting. So Steve is going to talk with you a little bit about program. We've been working on developing a program for several weeks now, and Steve, take it away.
Thanks. I trust everyone can hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Jim, and thank all of you. Glad to be here with you all this afternoon, and looking forward to having this be a discussion, a dialogue. Don't want it to just seem like I'm up here just presenting to you all, but by all means, jump in with questions or comments at any time. And of course, I want to extend that same opportunity to all the folks on our team, Jim and Paul and Ned. If I've forgotten to mention something or you want to jump in and qualify something I've said, please do so. But as Jim said, what we normally start with in designing a high school, architect starts with a program. And sometimes the client, the school system will already have a program totally prepared and know exactly what they want from a high school, because they do a lot of high schools and they want to have parity between the high schools, so they just hand you the program and say, here it is, designed according to this. In other situations like the one we have here, where you're doing your first new high school in a very, very long time, there's a lot of decisions that have to be made to write this program before we really start designing. And the program, in essence, is a written guide that defines the problem, helps the owner and the architect to define the problem. In this situation, the problem is what is needed to create a great high school for Halifax County that's going to serve all of your educational and athletic and community civic assembly needs, all these needs that a county like yours has for the next 50 to 75 years. How do you create that building that's flexible enough to handle those needs now and those changing needs over a very long period of time? So the program, ideally, it sets out what is the vision for the school and what are the goals and objectives, and typically we develop with you what we call guiding principles, which is this list of things that the school absolutely must do in order to be a successful school for you. And then once this vision and these goals and these guiding principles have been set, then the program takes on a big component of the program. Looks a lot like a spreadsheet. It looks like what you're looking at right there on the screen, in that it identifies what are the types of spaces in that first column there on the left-hand side. What are the types of spaces? Obviously, you're going to have all your classrooms and your science labs and your gymnasiums and the kind of things that are common to all high schools, but also there's a lot of work where we need to work with you all to determine what is unique to Halifax County and what is unique to this high school. Just as one example, these career and technology learning spaces and workforce training spaces, what are the unique needs of Halifax County with respect to those sort of special training spaces? And that's just one kind of, but there's a whole range of things that we have to discuss with you about what is needed, and then how many of each type of space, and what is the right size for each type of space. What are the required adjacencies, and what are the spaces that you need to be right adjacent to one another because they work off of each other, or what are spaces that you need to be far apart from one another, maybe because of acoustical reasons. Have your gymnasium right next to your media center, that kind of thing. And then really getting into a deep dive to program the classrooms and the science labs and the learning spaces to know more about, how do we accommodate the learning styles and the teaching methodologies that are unique to you all, that are going to function best for you. Jim, if you want to go ahead and flip to the next slide. So we have started this programming process. Now, we haven't been able to ask you any of those questions yet. We got a long way to go to work with you all, and to work with your principal and your staff, your faculty there, to answer all those questions, but we're not starting blind. What we do have is the existing floor plans of your school, which you see in front of you now, and have been, we've sort of color-coded them to help our own understanding of what the spaces you have right now and how you're using those. And then the next slide, Jim. We have your existing administrative master schedule. That's just a couple of pages there from your master schedule that tells us all the classes that you're teaching, and gives you your block schedule, periods 1 through 4 on each of 2 different days, and then some diagrams there on the right-hand side that shows which teachers are teaching in what spaces, what subjects, and help us to really get a sense of the program that you're running right now. So that then next slide, we're able to come up with this very, very long spreadsheet. There on the right, that's just 3 out of about 5 pages of this spreadsheet. But the big image you see right there in the center is sort of the summary of where we are right now. The summary of where we are, having not had the benefit of asking you all those questions that we need to ask. We know that budget-wise, we need to get the school down under 250,000 square feet, at or below 250,000. We also know that given the size of enrollment that you currently have, that's very doable. That's an appropriate square footage. It should not be difficult for us to get a school that works very well for you and to get it under 250. As you can see right there in that bottom yellow line, the square footage we're at right now, based on these assumptions, the sort of first pass assumption that we made, we're at 255. So we're on target roughly for a school that could work for an enrollment your size with the types of classes that you're teaching. But now we really have to get into it and start asking those questions and testing those assumptions. And we know that as we develop this program further and further, we need to be tightening down, not expanding up, because we're right at the size we want to be where it is, where the program is right now. So,
Hey, Steve?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry to interrupt, but just also, folks, just on that sort of criteria, we're also assuming, and we're assuming, we can verify this with you, but we're assuming that this includes 25 students per learning space. That's what these numbers are based on.
Roughly. So this program actually also identifies the number of teaching stations. A lot of these spaces in the program aren't actually teaching stations. Some of them are. And then they have an assumption about what is the right number of students for each teaching station. So for typical classrooms and for science labs, that number is about 24. For a lot of your CTE spaces, some of those are at 24, and some of those are only at 20, because certain of those programs have a limitation about the number of students. They have to be capped at 20. Then you have some special ed spaces that we may have identified as having 12. You've got your big music rooms, which might be 40 or even 50. So again, we've made a bunch of assumptions. We got to test those with you. But it's all coming out to, you can see that column right there, it says 1724. That's not actually the number of students. That recognizes that if you have about 1,475 students right now, knowing that not every classroom is full every period of the day, and not every seat in every classroom is full every period of the day, that if you have an enrollment that's actually around 1,475, you need to use a utilization factor that would actually have you a school that's around the 1,700 size. So there might be actually 1,700 chairs that somebody could be sitting in homeroom on any given day. That by having that many, then you know you've accommodated a population of 1,475 based on the fact that not every classroom is in use, not every seat is being used. Some of your classrooms, like freshman English, may not only have 24, they might have 26, they might have 28, but then you're going to have those classes like, Latin 4 AP or something
that's only gonna have like 8 students in it. So you can't plan for exactly 1475. You have to plan for a number, and the utilization factor we normally use is about 85%. So we're trying to hit around 1,700 there in that yellow line. You can see right now we're at 1,724. So again, with 81 teaching stations, rough capacity of a little over 1,700, right about 255,000 square feet. We're right in there for where we need to be, but as we make these decisions, we know we're trying to push down a little bit and not let it grow from here. So we have a lot of categories of questions that we're going to be working with your principal and your teachers moving forward, and you all. But we, as Jim has mentioned, we do have some kind of big categories we want to hit on to get your general take on this evening. And one of these is this, how do classroom spaces, how do the actual learning spaces serve students best? And to know that, you have to know, how do students learn best? And this, you probably have seen a diagram like this before. It's the cone of learning diagram that identifies the difference between passive learning and active learning. Those orange categories there are the sort of passive learning where you're sitting in a chair and you're listening to someone talk, or you're maybe just watching something on a screen, or just reading words on a page, where you're really being a passive learner. And the problem with those styles of learning is you don't get great retention. As you can see over there on the left, you remember 10% of what you read, 20% of what you hear. This current scholarship is very convincing that what students retain best is when they really roll their sleeves up and get activated and get involved in their learning. In that bottom part of the pyramid, where they're actually participating in a discussion or a seminar type of environment. Maybe they're the ones who are actually giving the presentation themselves. If they're having to teach something that they've already learned, you retain it much better if you're the one who's teaching it. If you're doing a dramatic presentation or simulating real life experiences like you do in those CTE spaces and your science labs, and when you're actually doing something that simulates a real life, real world experience, that's when your retention is best. So the current trends in educational design are to accommodate that kind of learning, as opposed to the traditional classrooms lined up on either side of a corridor where you sit in a chair and are lectured to by a teacher. Jim, if you want to flip to the next slide. So these are just brief discussion of some of those types of what we call next generation learning, where these spaces are project-based, passion-based learning activities. You have a variety of different kinds of spaces for a variety of learning styles. You have collaborative spaces, these zones, these learning zones at the heart of your classrooms where students collaborate with one another. Maybe they're coming from 2 different classrooms. Maybe you have students from a math classroom and a science classroom coming together to collaborate, or maybe it's an arts classroom and a science classroom coming together to collaborate on an arts science project. The spaces need to be flexible, and they need to be more informal spaces. So you do still have traditional lecture. That is still a relevant learning modality, but you also have those active learning spaces, and you're trying to accommodate a variety of group sizes. Not every classroom has to be designed for 725 students. Some types of learning are better for smaller groups. These diagrams here show, what you see on the left is that traditional school design, where you have all these equal classrooms that are lined up on either side of the corridor. And what happens then is your corridors are a whole lot of space that doesn't get used for anything except circulation between classes. And the kids will have to use those corridor spaces both for social activities between class or before school or after school, but also teachers use them for learning as well. They will sometimes send a group of students out into a corridor to do some activity in the corridor apart from what they're doing in class, which is not the best environment to try to learn in. The way the schools are designed today is more like what you're seeing on the right, where rather than having a corridor, you have this zone, this collaborative zone of student life around which classrooms are clustered. And then this space is outfitted with actual learning furnishings that facilitate learning. So you can still circulate through this space. It still functions very well for circulation between classes, but it's actually a highly useful space before class, after class, or to send a group of students out into this zone to collaborate with one another in between classes. Here's a floor plan diagram of such a thing, and you can see just what I've been describing. rather than having a narrow corridor in between these rows of classes, you've got this space that's more open and more user-friendly. And then this is an actual classroom bar that's taken from, it's a diagrammatic classroom bar that's taken from our Westmoreland High School. But you can see we also typically mix up the types of uses within any classroom wing. It is possible to do disciplinary wings. It's possible to do grade level wings. We're not seeing that much. We're not doing that often anymore in terms of school design. And I believe this is consistent with some things that you've expressed, some desires that you've expressed for this school, is that science is mixed in with English. Maybe it's grouped with art. Maybe your CTE spaces are right there in with your sort of mainstream coursework spaces. But this is a wing that's designed in that way, where yellow is science-related space, and orange is CTE, and blue is more traditional classrooms. And then there in the sort of rose color, you have a teacher planning zone, where you could have this sort of interdisciplinary approach to teacher planning, where your teachers from multiple different subjects all come together and work in a teacher planning space. That addresses all these. And this is a three-dimensional view of basically the same concept. But another concept that is illustrated by this notion of these teacher planning areas is that to make the best utilization of classroom space today, to get your efficiency on your building to work, it is customary these days that every teacher does not have their own classroom, and that can be a difficult thing for some teachers to come to accept. Frequently these days, science teachers may still have their own science lab. Your CTE teachers, of course, they've got to have the space that's unique to what they teach, so they have their own classroom, their own laboratory. But often those core classrooms like math and English, language arts, social studies, foreign language, that aren't so unique to the way they're designed that they have to be assigned to a teacher, those become spaces that teachers can move back and forth from. In 1 hour, they might be teaching in one room. In another hour, they might be teaching in another room. And then to accommodate those teachers and to give them what they need, you have these teacher planning areas, which are, you have areas for group collaboration, but you also often have carrels or cubicles where a teacher, I should say, has their own area where they can store their own things. It's a workspace unique to them. So they do still have a space assigned to them, but it's not an entire classroom. Next slide, Jim. Here are just some types of spaces that we are providing in high schools these days. And the teacher planning workroom there on the left, that's what I was just referring to, that has a lot of different types of furnishings and smaller environments that facilitate teachers collaborating with one another and planning or working individually. And I mentioned before the use of circulation. It's not just circulation anymore, but it's actually utilized. And there on that image on the right, you can see there's a stair there. It's not only a stair, but it actually works as a informal seminar space, where it's great for, again, socializing at lunchtime or before or after school. But also a class can come right out to that space and use that stair as a learning space, an informal learning space, rather than staying within their classroom. So those are some of the kinds of spaces that we're providing in schools today. So with all that said, just wanted to, before we jump into the discussion of auditorium, just open that topic up to you all, this whole idea of the sort of collaborative approach to learning and collaborative approach to teacher planning, and not having teachers assign their own classrooms, which is something that we really need to do in order to keep the square footage of the school where it needs to be. But just get some of your reaction on learning styles or anything you want to input about what we've discussed so far.
Mr. Lloyd.
Can you hear me, sir?
I can now, I heard that.
Okay, great. Yeah, the college-style classroom is something that I actually been excited about some time, and having the teacher planning workrooms. I like that concept a lot. I think especially with our block scheduling, I can see that being very beneficial. But one thing you said earlier that I'm a little bit confused on, because it's the first time I've heard it, but I heard it twice today, and that was the integrated spaces, the art beside math, beside science. This is the first time that I've heard that, but I know you mentioned that it came from our school system. So I'm not sure if I'm the only one that's just hearing this for the first time, or I guess I'm curious as to where that conversation started, or who may have offered that suggestion.
Steve, could I answer that one?
Sure.
So, great question. Thank you for that terrific question. So, in a high school, there's really two fundamental ways to organize the curriculum and organize the pedagogy. One is by department, right? So you have the departments of science, math, English, and they stay together, and they're in the school, in those proximities within the school together. And the other one is called interdisciplinary planning, where you mix those pedagogies, those curriculums together in, say, one classroom cluster area, one wing of the school. So you have English, science, math, and maybe art, and maybe even career and technical education, all in that one cluster, and they plan and learn in an interdisciplinary way. But the school can be flexible to accommodate either one that you want.
Yeah, and
One of
I'm
the
sorry,
things
but
that we've heard is, and this is a common request, is that when schools have a very obvious disciplinary structure to the way they're designed, that the result for the student experience is that they feel like they are in a track. You know, they've been put on a track and they're moving forward in that track. And so if for instance, all your career and technology education spaces are off in some wing, like, you know, what might have used to be called the CTE building or something like that, the students that have selected those classes often find that they are, you know, on that track. And then students who are aiming toward higher education or something that requires a more sort of core academic study, you know, they're in that track. And the students don't tend to mix, they don't tend to meet, and you don't get the benefit of the sort of symbiotic interactions between students who have different interests and different plans for what they do after high school. So there is a trend toward, it's still handled both ways, it's definitely handled both ways, but there is a growing trend to blending core academic spaces with career and technology education spaces. And we have, you know, because we've been involved with you all now for actually a few years since you first started considering this project, we have had a number of these conversations, early conversations, not as in-depth as the conversations that we're going to be having with you, but that is something that we have heard from people within your system, that this is a desired thing, that there be a more blended approach.
okay. If I may, I'd like to ask a follow-up question. So and again, this is the first time hearing about this, so I'm trying to get my thoughts together, but when I hear you speak and I'm thinking, okay, it would appear to me that the department concept would be easier if you're doing college-style classrooms where you have floating teachers and shared teacher planning workrooms. Because at that point, am I missing something? It would just seem to be easier if that teacher may be floating from classroom to classroom, but in theory, they're floating within the same section of the building, as opposed to, you know, floating throughout the building to another wing altogether, as I would picture if you have more of the other design, more of the integrated style. That's just my initial reaction when I'm listening to that.
Madam Chair?
Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Well,
What? Wait just a minute.
we know that in order to meet the level of efficiency that we need, get the building to the size that you can afford, we cannot build a classroom for each teacher.
And I definitely don't want that, Mr. Boyd.
And have, you know, when a teacher is not teaching, have that classroom just empty.
And-
So independent of how things are organized, it's important that those teachers have a space that they can go to secure their personal things and to do their planning while they're not in a classroom.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate, I love
So,
can you hear me, Mr. Boyd?
Whether you choose to organize by discipline, you don't have a English training, math training, foreign language training, that sort of thing.
Mr. Boyd,
Harder classroom area.
Mr. Boyd, Mr. Boyd,
But
Mr. Boyd.
But if we are to put all the science rooms together, we typically put those in the highest, when we do that, we put them on.
Mr. Boyd,
So that we can exhaust, fumes, unpleasant odors directly outside the building is easy.
Mr. Boyd, can you hear us?
So from a planning point of view, there are few
Mr.
things
Boyd.
that we need to kind of get off in the right direction.
Mr. Boyd, and this is Roy Keith again. I'd like to reiterate that I am a solid proponent of the college-style classroom and the teacher planning workrooms. I mean, I think that's a concept that's perfect for Halifax County, especially with our current scheduling model. But I guess my only concern was the department versus the integrated. And maybe concern is too strong a word. I just never heard that we had already discussed or mentioned one format over the other. That was my only take on that. I was shocked to learn that we mentioned that.
Move forward, and these further discussions, if that is not desired, if we need to change track on that, and that's what we will learn from you in the coming month or so here as we refine this program. And it may be that it's quite possibly some sort of a hybrid solution. There will be certain of those types of career technology education spaces that do have to be segregated. It's just automotive repair, for instance, small engine repair. That's clearly a different kind of space. And honestly, automotive repair might even be in a separate building. Or some of those spaces that require very high day teaching spaces, for flexible lab type space, your building trades instruction, that are very, very noisy. Those things could certainly be off by themselves. Whereas other types of career and technology instruction, whether that's nursing, for instance. Thank you. A nursing program might get blended right in with a few other science rooms. There might be some symbiosis there between having your biology and anatomy, physiology, science labs have a close proximity to nursing instruction. So that would be an example of where they actually get blended together rather than being off in that separate CTE zone.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
You have a question.
I was just going to share my opinion. I as well really like the flexible spaces, the teacher planning space where they have an area they can lock up their stuff. It's more secure and they can communicate and coordinate better. I do think it's very important that we get teacher and school and community feedback on that, because the 8 of us can say what we think, but without the buy-in from teachers in the community, it's not going to make a difference. So I do really like the flexible space as well, but I would also really like to get the school and community involvement.
Just right out a question.
Yes, sir, Mr. Potts.
Can you hear me, gentlemen?
Yes.
All right, good. With this trending that you're indicating that these new concepts are coming up with, how long do you expect that trending to last? Because I don't want to see us doing something and 25 years later they're saying we need to do something else, which probably won't happen since the one that we're doing now has lasted 40, 50 years. So to me it seems like something fresh and new that needs to be looked at. But I'm still wondering how long that's going to last. Do y'all have?
But that's a great question.
So I would answer that by saying the way that schools were designed for literally decades and decades was in response to efficient building construction and efficient building maintenance, efficient building custodial care, that sort of thing, without being backed with a lot of science about how kids learn. And so I have used the word trend several times here, and that maybe gives not the right impression. It can actually have sort of negative connotations to it, the word trend, because it sounds like something that could change with the winds, in a few years. There's so much scholarship now about how students learn best and how older school buildings did not have the flexibility to accommodate teachers in their quest to approach different students with different learning styles by responding to them with different teaching methods when the buildings themselves did not facilitate different teaching methods. This kind of design is based on a lot of actual research. It's data-based design, data-driven, based on how students learn best and how they retain information best. And that's not the kind of thing that I think is going to change in 15 or 20 years. I think, now that that is known, I'm not saying that there won't be changes. There's always new developments. There's always new ways to improve. But that's also part of the quest here, is to design a school that's flexible enough to accommodate those future changes. But the approach that says we're designing different types of environments that are furnished in different ways and that are different sizes and they're equipped with different fixtures, furnishings, and equipment to accommodate a broader range of teacher approaches. I wouldn't really describe that as a trend. That's probably not the right word for me to have used. It's a response to actual science that improves the way we design schools.
And to that point, Steve, and again, there's no guarantees here, but what we've heard from teachers and staff on schools we've designed with this approach is that your return on this investment is actually test scores go up, absentee goes down, the culture is positive in the schools, the students love being there, the teachers love being there, so these types of environments are very productive for learning.
Ms. Wright,
Yes, sir.
a comment.
Yes, sir.
I concur with what you're saying. Do you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
it would be useful when you're speaking, if you could say, who's speaking?
Oh, okay.
I recognize Mr. Lloyd, I recognize Mr. Potts, but
Okay.
it's not that, voice isn't that clear coming through.
Okay.
You don't,
I apologize for not doing that. This is Walter Potts. One of the things in doing this type of concept, and in the concept where you have a mixture of what's going on in schools, one of the things I found to be a problem, because of my observation for the last 40 years, is that we tend to put the same kids in the same area, and believe it or not, somebody in one wing may not even know who's over in the other wing, because they never react with one another. And the bottom line is they will be reacting with one another, because guess what? Just because I'm in CTE, I still got to react to those kids somewhere else. Just because I'm in the nursing aspect, I do have to react on the outside. And that's the same thing with CTE, with people. And if I'm not rounded in that type of reaction, I may be looked at as a nerd. Or I may be looked at in some negative form of some type of classification that people so easily put on those. So, but I think it's a good concept that you came up with. I'm glad you put in that trend was not the best word probably for that, but the fact that you said the right thing, that the data from this type of learning style has increased what we need to increase. Mm-hmm. And that's what it's all about. Not, because we can say that's what it's all about, and then somebody else comes up and say, well, no, we don't need to do that, we need to go back to the original way. And I said, well, the original way is not the way that is going to be good for the kids in the future. Because we can't keep living in the past, we have to live in the future. And I'm glad that you kind of responded to that so we can get a clear understanding of what's going on. Thank you.
Mr. Boyd, can you hear me? This is Ms. Fraley.
I couldn't quite hear that.
This is Ms. Fraley.
Yes.
I just have a question, and this might be ahead of the game. I noticed early on in the presentation with the students being out in different areas of the school building and the glass and so forth that was represented in what you were showing us. Are you going to be addressing security Okay, then I'll be quiet. Okay.
We just want to make sure this conversation that we've talked about some overarching goals, and we're going to look at some organizational strategies for the school in a minute. But right now we're dealing with program and kind of overarching methodologies and overarching goals. But security is very important in every building that we design. And how people keep buildings secure is, I know it's very important to this school board. I'm well aware of what's been going on in the county.
Yeah, we follow what's called CEPTED. That's an acronym for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. That's a national organization. We follow their guiding principles for safe school design. So if you want to look them up on the internet, you can see what they're all about. But we definitely, safe school design is very important to us, absolutely.
Well, I suggest that we move on to the next topic. Which
Madam Chair.
is our tour.
Mr. Camp has a question, Mr. Boyd.
Sure.
Jim, J. Camp, getting back to I just want to touch again on the, those common spaces and the data that has been extracted from the use of those common spaces, you know, the ARC, the CTE, and I think Mr. Clee said that the data is pretty significant and test scores have risen pretty significantly with those areas being utilized that way. I personally think that that's a very good thing, because that way is, like Mr. Potts was saying, some students don't even know other students exist. I mean, because they're in another part of the building. So, how long is, I don't know, I'm making a comment, I'm trying to come up with a question somewhere, but how long is this way of design, how long has that been in existence, I guess, is one question that I want to know.
Oh, you'd be the best person to answer that.
Well, I will say, I've been doing this for 32 years at Green Parker, and my first high school I designed had interdisciplinary planning, which was 32 years ago. But also relative to project-based learning and collaborative learning, and really from the statistics that Steve and Jim presented, that really most students learn by doing, 90% of students learn by doing. That idea has been around for about 10, 15 years, and schools have been adapting that since then. But it just progresses. And to Steve's point, back in the day, we would design high schools relative to how they would function as a building. Now we're designing high schools as how they function as learning environments for students, so those students can thrive in their future. That's our goal.
Okay.
And Mr. Camp, go ahead, Jim. I was going to say, the gentleman that probably first came up with project-based learning was Dr. Booker T. Washington. And he believed very much in hands-on learning. When they built Tuskegee University, that was the method of teaching. So we know from way back that it's effective. Of course, times have moved on, and sometimes people who did things long ago and pioneered ideas don't always get credit. But we want to go back and say, how far back have people been talking about this? The answer is it's a really long time.
Yeah, and most people will, if they think back to their own high school experience, a lot of people, I'll say this, the things they remember best are the things they did, much more so than the things that a teacher said to them when they were sitting in a chair in the classroom. I mean, we remember, dissecting the frog or dissecting the grasshopper or the shark or whatever you might have had the opportunity to dissect in your science lab. That's such a memorable experience. And the things that you maybe did in your shop class where you actually built something and, you have those memories. And then when you try to remember what you were discussing in your world history class, it's all kind of a fog. But yeah, teachers have been getting more and more creative, and there's a lot of sharing of planning where teachers who taught those classes that were traditionally just lecture classes, those core classes like language arts and world history, or history, social studies, how they can convert their subject matter into more project-based activities where the students are doing the research and interacting with one another, collaborating, presenting to each other, and that area has really been growing. And you will definitely hear folks say, and I'm sure you've heard them say, well, I learned in an old style, school environment with just classrooms lined up on the corridors and the teacher lecturing to me in the front room, and I did just fine. I learned lots and I've done great. And that is definitely true. There's lots of people who did just fine in those teaching environments. It's just that it's a one-size-fits-all approach. Not everybody did great. And when you create these opportunities to teach in a lot of different methods that give teachers more opportunity to reach students through different ways, you spread that success around better than maybe it was historically.
Well, I like it. I like it. I like the idea. I do. Because, it gets everybody together. You see one another. It's like you said, it's kind of like playing on a football team, okay? That's what I remember the most when I was in school, playing on a football team. Some of my best friends I met on a football team, okay? And we were all together. We all did something. We all learned something by doing. And, that we need to translate that from an athletic field to the schools. So, to get that feeling for one another, about one another, how to get along and be all about, doing good and being good. So I like the idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, Jim has introduced the topic of auditoriums and performance, and this is another big topic that we want to make some decisions on very early because it really guides the approach for the design of organizing all the major elements of the school on the site, is how do you approach the topic of the auditorium? The auditorium is one of the largest spaces in a high school. It's also absolutely the most expensive space in a high school on a square foot basis because of the height of the space and the technology that goes into it and this the fixed seating and the equipment that you use on stage. It's an expensive component in your school, and also it is one of the least used on a day-to-day basis. It's a lot of use for school assemblies and evening performance and those things, but a lot of times your auditoriums are empty during the day. So having the right strategy for the auditorium is key to the economy of the school and to the right functioning of the school for you. This is a very traditional auditorium. This one is from Louisa High School, which you may have toured or you may yet tour, but this is Louisa High School, a very traditional approach to auditorium design with the stage that has a fly loft over it. It's all fixed seating. It's raked on a sloped floor. Has both the ordinary house lighting, but also the performance lighting. This one accommodates about 900, I believe, students. We typically recommend that an auditorium of this type be able to seat about half the school population so that you can get everybody into an assembly in 2 assemblies. So if you got 1,500 students, you'd want an auditorium that seats about 750. If you think that sometime over the next 50 to 75 years, you could, right now your population is declining, but that trend could change. Maybe in the next 50 years, you might be back up to 800. Maybe you want to design an auditorium for 900. The way you design this auditorium, it is what it is at that point. That's how many it's going to accommodate. An approach like this with the sloped floor and the fixed seating is not the only way to go. The next image is an approach. Now these are black box theaters. They're a little bit smaller, but you can actually use the same approach for larger auditoriums. It's all flat floor, and the seating is some of it's loose seating, some of it's fixed seating that's on like telescoping stands. Similar to the telescoping stands you might have in a gymnasium, but it's a little bit higher grade. The seats are cushioned and upholstered, but the seats do still pull back. This is another example. This one is from Harrisonburg High School, but it's a big open flat floor space where the seating is on telescoping stands. And at this point, you're not trying to seat 50% of the school. You're picking some smaller number. Maybe you're only going to seat 25% of the school at a time. There's also hybrid approaches where I don't have a slide that illustrates this, but if you go back to Louisa, if you could imagine that there might be a movable partition there running right down that sort of center line of the right there where Jim's marking out in the cursor. It's possible that everything in front of that point is sloped seating, fixed seating on a sloped floor, but everything behind that is on a flat floor with telescope seating, so that when you pull back those seats in the back of the house, you've got a very large flat floor room there. So, we know that you need to not only accommodate your drama program and your music program, but you have other needs that require large open spaces. Your ROTC program, for one, likely requires a big open space. Maybe the right approach for Halifax is not an auditorium like this, but one that has a flat floor or a hybrid style approach. And we just wanted to toss those ideas out to you and get your reaction to that.
One of the things we learned in our engagement from 2 years ago, I think it was Mr. Lewis who brought this up, said it would be very helpful to have what he referred to as a forum. There's one high school here in Albemarle County that has a forum, and it's used a lot. So in an Albemarle County forum, I don't think it seats more than 100, maybe 150 people. But if we were to size this lower area for a forum type population, and then have that movable divider, we could have on most days this flat space, as Steve was saying, could be used for a variety of other things. And then when you have an assembly, you move the dividers back, you pull the seats out, and you have a big auditorium that you need for other things. We don't know if that's a concept that would interest you, but how we handle the theater is such a big deal. We feel like we need to discuss this very early in the process. Now, I do know that there's a small theater at the Prizer, but a lot of use of your theater is not just by the school system, but by other people in Halifax County who are looking for an auditorium space. And it's like this or nothing. So I would imagine that you want an auditorium. The question is, how big is big enough? So we'd like to listen to what you have to say. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
Walter Potts here, how you doing again? Can we look at that concept you have right there and do a hybrid where we can possibly have the students in there for classroom activities?
To have class in the flat areas?
Class somewhere, and I mean, we can make it.
Yeah, that would be the goal. I mean, and you get that kind of double duty, and that helps you reduce the size of your school.
But I'm not talking about all the time. I'm talking about if a teacher wants to go, and we got, let's say the whole English department want to have something and do it for the English department, we can space that off just for the English department without having some of the kids in the back and some of them in the front, but have them all going, whether, like Mr. Lewis has said about a forum or something, but a space provided for us to utilize, having not multiple things at one time, but multiple things going on in there as far as education is concerned. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand you're talking about the possibility of using this for classroom activities where you'd have multiple things going on at the same time, maybe multiple smaller groups using the same space at the same time. Is that right?
Do it both ways. We can do it either with multiple groups or with a single group, but I still think that we could, you know, that's in case the teacher wants, I want to get my kids out of the doggone classroom for the day, or two teachers decide to do that, then it might take 40 kids down to where they can occupy have enough space for 40 kids. So, one of the natural things you can do is use the gym, the cafeteria, or the auditorium. So the first two would be out of the question, but the auditorium wouldn't be. That make sense? A little bit?
I think so. I'm catching most of what you're saying, but I gotta confess, I'm not catching every single word.
Oh, okay.
But yes, I mean, when you have a really large space like this, with really high ceilings, you know, the idea of being able to pull an operable partition across a space, you know, it's a costly partition, and it is takes a little maneuvering to work with. So it's the kind of thing that you might set it up and leave it that way for several days as you use both halves of the auditorium, and then when you're ready to use the auditorium from its full capacity, then you move it aside and maybe it stays that way for a few days. It's a lot more difficult to make that sort of a day-to-day thing that's not merely flexible, but really easily, conveniently flexible for a variety of uses on a frequent basis. You know, it's something that we could study, and to the extent that the space is maybe smaller, you know, maybe it's not a space that's accommodating 750 or 900, and if it is a flat floor space, that does improve the flexibility of the space to where it becomes more possible to carve it into smaller spaces and use it for smaller uses even during the school day. Am I answering your question?
Somewhat.
Mr. Boyd, can you hear me? This is Kathy Fraley.
Yes.
I just have a quick question. Would one of these choices be better applicable to the community, because the community also uses the auditorium at the high school?
Yeah, well, that's exactly the kind of input we want to get from you all. How frequently is it used by the community during the evening? And when the community uses it for non-school functions, you know, what size functions are those? What capacity seating do you need to accommodate those community non-school functions?
Board, okay, if the principal answers that question?
Sure.
We can.
Good afternoon, this is Michael Lewis.
But I will comment based on the question about community use. If you guys do consider a flexible auditorium that is more of a hybrid with some fixed seating and some retractable seating with a level floor, certainly that makes it more usable and flexible for the community as well. Even the flat level floor, if they want to have a gathering or a celebration with tables, you know, they can move in there and have a celebration, or if they want to have a performance, they'd have the fixed seating as well as retractable seating. So it still functions as a full-size theater, but the back area being allowable to be flexible and open could also function as some sort of venue for any sort of celebration or party or something like that.
And we could do that in lieu of going to the cafeteria, because everything on what you're just saying would have to take place in the cafeteria, wouldn't it, Mike?
Yeah, I think to answer the question about the number of people who use it, I think the community uses it more than the high school population herself. Typically, they're not going to have audience sizes above 700 or 750, and I think currently now we're like 1190 or 1250 capacity. It is rented quite a bit. I mean, it stays pretty busy with local dance companies and things like that. I think what you're talking about with flexible spacing would accommodate what we see come through our auditorium. You know, whether it be stationary 750 seats, that will work. If it was some that were stationary and then you had a retractable seating area, that would also serve most of what takes place in there.
1,200 seat auditorium. And then when you don't fill it up, the performers feel really inflated, and it's not very inspiring for the performers to be performing with a half-seated auditorium. So that's counterproductive. But that's a great comment, sir.
Right, and if you, as Paul was saying, the flat floor approach, again, it really depends on how many community functions you have and how many different variety of community functions you have. But for instance, some of the site concepts we'll look at in a little bit propose that the dining room is not necessarily a room. It's not totally enclosed on all four sides. It may be open along one edge to circulation. It may be a more flowing space. And so the dining room, while it still can certainly function for meeting space and that sort of thing, it may have a different functionality than a dining room that's enclosed. So just imagine, for instance, that somebody wants to lease a school space for, say, a wedding reception or something, and if the dining room doesn't feel enclosed or private enough, are they going to reserve a gymnasium for a wedding reception? If you have a nice, enclosed flat floor space, similar to that image from Harrisonburg that Jim had up there a moment ago, that's going to be more flexible for that kind of use than obviously an auditorium that has sloped floor and fixed seats.
Mr. Lloyd?
Mr. Boyd, can you hear me? This is Roy Keith Lloyd. My preference would be, and again, I'm just as one board member, I would say my preference would be the sloped seating and an auditorium that's that is specifically an auditorium. But maybe we look at the capacity, such as what Mr. Lewis suggested, and maybe look at maybe a 750 capacity, which I think would serve most of our purposes there. It would give you an auditorium style room. It would be specific for an auditorium with the slope seating. I would also, one of my thoughts was I would almost question the durability of this stadium style seating that's retractable. I would think you would get more life value or a longer life out of the fixed seating. Is that accurate or is that inaccurate? I would just think it's more wear and tear when you're retracting seating over and over, and like you said, I picture these partitions being something that's fairly heavy, fairly cumbersome. I don't know, to me, I think we could definitely reduce the size of our current auditorium because, like you said, there are a lot of empty seats there, but maybe if we look at a sloped style auditorium with a 750 capacity, we could accomplish pretty much everything that we do in there now in Halifax County. And maybe that is somewhat a question for Mr. Lewis. And
To answer your question about the wear and tear on retractable seating, the retractable seating we're talking about is very well made. In fact, the manufacturers that make the fixed seating also make the retractable seating, the same manufacturer. And they're very well made. And quite frankly, if you go up to New York or any Broadway shows up there now, a lot of the theaters are using retractable seating for flexibility. So it's something that's very prevalent and it's very cost effective. And it's very durable.
This is Lacey. I'd really like to go and visit one if we are talking about doing the retractable seating. I think the flexibility is a good idea, but I would like to see that in person.
And may we ask Mr. Lewis for his thoughts on sloped versus flat?
Yeah, so I had opportunity to tour Louisa, and the picture they're showing here, and it is absolutely a great design. I haven't had opportunity to see one with the retractable seating. I would like Ms. Shotwell said, to be able to see the difference between the two. I think in general what Mr. Lloyd has said is the 750 as opposed to the 1,200 plus seating will serve our community quite well, both building level experiences and community level experiences. So before committing one way or the other, I would like to see a retractable seating, but certainly the design in Louisa, if it was reduced to 750, would serve our school division very well. It was very well done.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Lewis, could you tell us exactly when the dance groups are there? That's probably only time that it's probably been halfway filled or almost filled? Or what has been the population of the, amount of attendees at those type of events?
Right. Yeah, great question, Mr. Potts. Typically, they may halfway fill the first floor, so 500 to 600 participants, and then you had the participants themselves. So I guess the people attending and then the participants, rarely at capacity. When we are at capacity on the first floor is when we do in-school functions with 2 or 3 grade levels, which happen throughout the year. I mean, we have our own things that take place. So then we have our weekend events. We have our own theater program. We want to support that and be there for that community as well. Really want to revitalize that part of it too. So I think when you have that new theater space, you're going to get more students who want to be in it. Rarely will we have a capacity over 750 unless we went to a 3rd grade level. It's not quite big enough now to hold all 4. You know, we would, something that you held all 4, you would do inside the gymnasium. And I would anticipate in designing a new build that our gymnasium would also be air conditioned and have capacity to do larger number of experiences for people. So in my mind, the 750 number makes perfect sense.
Mr. Lewis, to your comment about Louisa, we'd be happy to take anyone on a tour from your group to Louisa to show that theater, as well as show the school. And then also, James Madison University has a theater with retractable seating. We can take you there as well and show you that. But again, we're not saying an all or nothing approach. We're saying probably a hybrid with some retractable, some fixed.
Exactly.
Well, let's move on to
Before we do,
another
where's Madison
topic
located?
item.
I have a question. Where's Madison located? Harrisonburg.
What was that, Mr. Potts?
And I was saying, someone says Harrisonburg, Harrisonburg is where James Madison is located, right?
Yeah.
About 3 hours from here.
Yeah,
Maybe.
James, I can't quite understand the question. James Madison is in Harrisonburg, yes, that's correct.
About 2 more times, 3 hours.
I think what some of the board members are trying to do is, in their minds, plan how they could visit these places without taking more than one trip.
Okay, yeah.
Louisa's just down the road from JMU. However, Westmoreland, which is one of the other schools that they were looking.
On opposite ends of the state, right.
Right. So it's a matter. Board members have lives too, and they don't want to be fatigued. So and that's one of the things we were hoping that Jim would talk about at the end of this meeting about visits.
Jim, if you want to go to the next slide.
For whatever reason, I'm not advancing correctly. Okay. Gymnasiums.
Yes.
Speaking of gymnasiums,
Yeah. So designing a gymnasium to accommodate your physical education needs, not challenging. We need to ask a few questions of your staff there, of your PE teachers. What sports they like to run in the gym, and how many teaching stations the gym need to function for at any given time. That's easily addressed. The big question in the gym is all about the seating capacity. If we're simply trying to accommodate the seating for, say, the population of the school, or if we're trying to go to something much larger than that. I know that the gym that you have now has a second tier of seating, and you're set up, I think, for regional tournaments of a certain size. We would need to know what the overall capacity of the seating in that gymnasium needs to be, because at some point it does become the best way to handle it is definitely with the second tier rather than just enormous sets of telescoping stands. You want to just go ahead and go to that second floor design like the school that you see in front of you here, which is Henry Wise High School.
And to that point, Steve, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but to that point, relative to Steve's suggestion about the seating capacity, instead of going out, go up, we did a study several years ago relative to the cost of construction, and we determined that it's more cost effective and least costly to build up than to build out. So that's why we're suggesting if you want this higher seating capacity, we go up with tiers rather than go out.
But the question is, how many people, and I know this is guess, but how many people might come to a regional tournament? What do we need to plan?
Or
You have a clue.
3,000 requires seating for regional.
Yeah, that's correct. Currently, ours seats 3,500, which does meet the 3,000 for regional events.
That's a Virginia High School League rule. You can't host a regional activity indoors unless you have 3,000, and outdoors, I believe it's 6,000. Is that right?
I think so. We can confirm those numbers, but yeah, right now we're at 3,500. That's where we're at. And that's one of the fan favorites of our community is our basketball gym. When you come in, it's an excellent game situation. I think what we have to consider in a new design too is make sure it's great for education as well. But we wanted to have that, or at least I do. I say we, but I'm representing our school. Would like to have it have that same appeal when you come in. It's a great game environment.
So how, with that 3,500, when you have those regional events, do you fill out to the full 3,500? Or if you had the 3,000, would that accommodate you for most of the events that you're getting?
I mean, it's been full a couple of times in my experience. We beat GW a couple of years ago, and it was full for that game for a regional championship. But typically, 3,000 should satisfy our needs.
And this is Lacey. Something that I've heard multiple times about our current high school that folks really like is the track around the second story. Having that visibility and second use is really popular in the community from what I've heard.
I agree with that. Matter of fact, that was going to be one of my questions, whether we can have a walk around on that, because I think it's good. We don't have too many people using
Up on this
it.
level?
Yeah, on the second level.
Yeah.
We gotta go up, and that's what we've done here, but it really shows us good, because it really does a good job for the basketball team when they come in. I don't know if anybody's seen that but me. I think
Me too.
maybe some of y'all have seen that, but I've seen it quite a lot. And it's very impressive the way they come in, you know. And but I really have another question. On the ends, under the goals, what type of seating, is that retractable seating under that?
Right here?
Yeah,
I don't know.
It is, yes, retractable.
it's retractable on both ends?
Yes.
Okay. And of course, we can get the lettering we want in the seating and all that.
Sure, yeah.
We got this. One
Yeah,
and of course,
the idea is that the seating, the benches on the floor they're all retractable, and so when they retract, that's how you also have your practice courts. So the gym would have big practice courts as well.
right. That's what we got now.
Well,
And the advantage to that second tier is, you can picture right now, you can see that second tier up there is on a whole separate floor. If that whole thing was one telescopic stand, apart from just being monstrous and unwieldy, you couldn't do anything at all with the space underneath. It'd just be lost space. By putting that second tier of telescopic stands up high like that, you're putting it on top of what could be locker rooms, storage rooms, a lot of useful space. And once you go to that scenario where you've already acknowledged that you've got a whole second floor at that level, and you want people at the top level to be able to egress at 3 or 4 different corners of the gym, it just starts to make sense that you go ahead and connect them with a perimeter pedestrian way that can be used as a track, like you're describing.
Mr. Boyd, this is Roy Keith again. I know Mr. Lewis touched on this, but I'd like to reiterate just a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, at that 3,500, there was not another inch of space available in that gym that night. I mean, when we say we were filled to capacity, you were shoulder to shoulder as tight as you could get in there. So myself, I would hate to reduce that 3,500.
In addition to that, the walk possible, the only other time that auditorium is filled, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, is when we have graduation on the
Yes, sir.
inside. That bad boy ain't big enough then.
Yeah,
So we have to limit the number of people that can come by giving out, you know, the minimum amount of cars you can get in on, so. I think I have to go with Keith on that. Reducing that to 3,000 might save us a little money, but I think it'll look better and be a lot less crowded than that. We got 3,500, particularly for graduation. And we are gonna make some regional games, whether y'all think so or not, but we will
Absolutely.
make some more regional games. So let's keep that in mind. Thank you.
I've attended a graduation at the high school, and it's full,
Yeah.
Every time.
full, even with the limited number of people each graduate can bring.
And that's including less graduates as well. We've had 500 when my brother-in-law graduated from there. Now we're down to what, 93?
Yeah, we'd probably be at 350 this year, something like that.
Yeah, 500 graduates, man, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we've had close to that in my tenure, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it probably was 6.
That's a lot of kids. And not to mention grandparents and everybody coming in town. Especially senior school. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't supposed to say this.
Well, I think you've answered all of our questions about the gym. So maybe we could talk a little bit about CTE. We of course know that some of your students go to the Southern Virginia higher ed center. And I hear that there's talk of maybe more going in the future than in the past. But just like the question about collaborative learning, is that something that's a 3 or 4 year plan, or is that going to be a 4 year plan? How much CTE space should we be planning? And of course, on the upper left-hand side of this picture, we show an automotive bay. A lot of these CTE spaces need to be very tall to accommodate what people are doing. And you can fix a lot of things later, but you can't raise the ceiling. So we want to be sure we provide enough high bay space that it can meet your needs for, for some time to come. But do you have any idea what this relationship with the Southern Virginia Higher Ed Center is going to look like 10 years, 15 years down the road?
Hopefully the board will stop me if I say the wrong thing. We have a brand new CTE coordinator. She's doing a dynamic job of reinfusing enthusiasm in CTE. We feel like CTE is something that our community very much wants us to pursue, especially to fill in positions in the workforce and to keep our kids here working in the community. There are some opportunities at the Southern Virginia Higher Education Center that we're taking advantage of, but we still would like to have the CTE as part of the comprehensive high school, and we do not want it to be in the back room or in the back or in the basement. We want it to be infused, but I think that question would be best answered by Rebecca Saunders, who has a much better handle on that, and she's also been working diligently with the State Department of Education with regard to CTE and also.
The tendency has, in the past, has been maybe to relegate CTE to the basement. The nature of building trades, automotive, maybe agriculture, where they're bringing the tractor into the lab to discuss it. Those pretty much have to go to the lowest level. But there are other things, like nursing, that could be in there. Culinary arts, might be better located over near the kitchen.
Be good next to
I don't know if we teach cosmetology right now, but that's something that we have put on ground floor schools. So there are lots of opportunities to spread those activities throughout the building.
Excuse me, Mr. Walter Potts again. we're starting to look at some things with HVAC and electrical. Couldn't those two be put in there with the mainstream of the kids rather than being down on the bottom floor in the back out of sight or in the corner in the dark as some people do?
Could, what was, you were asking about HVAC and electrical.
Electrical, HVAC,
They can use them, pretty intensive in that area. They're also fairly expensive spaces. I don't know, as we get into a deeper understanding of what it is that we're going to teach, we can better answer that. Now, one of the questions, not really a question, but something that we may want to consider would be moving anything that handles gasoline to a completely separate structure. Under the building code, many fire officials consider those to not be an educational function, but rather a high hazard storage facility. And it may be for just the practicality of isolating that in your best interest to literally move them out of the building. But we'll be studying that more as we move on.
Mr. Lewis?
Right, I would say about the HVAC and the electrical, the HVAC in particular, some of the times when we've done those spaces, we've made them very tall spaces, because you may actually have the students, fabricating sheet metal ductwork or something that, both, vertical duct configurations as well as horizontal, and you may have a second tier within that lab. It's not necessary that it be done that way, but we've seen it done that way. The electrical, we've seen those in some spaces that didn't necessarily have to be really tall, maybe 16 to 18 feet high, but in some of the site strategies that you'll see in a little bit, we're typically assuming that the ground floor of the classroom wings, just to deal with the grade changes that you have on your site, the ground floor probably is in the 18 as much as 20 feet high from floor to floor anyway. So yeah, I think it's possible that you could have the electrical CTE space in the same wing as some traditional classrooms. Less confident about the HVAC. I definitely think that there's some types of spaces like the building trades and automotive, which are going to need to be more segregated from, but electrical HVAC, yeah, maybe. They might be in the same space. It just kind of depends on the specific things that they're going to be teaching in those spaces. And the question of the automotive will also be linked to how many automotive bays you've got. Because the bigger that automotive program gets, it's also a fairly expensive program, and then you start to get into a lot of gasoline storage and motor oil storage and other flammables, transmission fluid storage, that sort of thing. And if you have a lot of bays, and you need to also have obviously an exhaust system that pumps all that exhaust from those automobiles out. The most economical way to deal with that may be a prefabricated metal building that's pulled away from the main school.
Another subject that we do teach that might, let's say might, have to have some consideration is anything related to turf management or landscaping, where you're storing fertilizers or weed killers and things of that nature. The building code takes a very dim view of fertilizer. And while you could have a few bags of fertilizer, you can buy enough fertilizer for your lawn, and it already moves into a category where you have to have a special container. So those are things that we're going to be looking at very closely. Just they're going, we have to deal with it. So when we interviewed with you back in January, we talked about what would be some of the best ways to save money. And this slide actually was from that interview, and the yellow, highlighted yellow items are things that you're actually doing. At the bottom, we suggested and opt for a contracting arrangement that allows for very early purchase of materials and working with Curtis. Curtis, I think that was one of your first suggestions. So we're very much in sync with that. But to hold the cost down, we have to try to mitigate the size of the building. This little image on the right over here that is Louisa High School. That's what we used in our PPDA submission. It's 270,000 square feet. That is too big to reach about. So we've been looking for ways to reduce costs. So we're going to look at some images, and just so that you know how we're thinking, we used this particular classroom bar as a kind of a starting point. I don't think we pushed this piece out quite as far, but it has some collaboration space in it, so we've already cranked that into our thinking. You know your site. You know your site well. This is the existing high school. This is the Powell property. There is a private road that extends down into the Powell property. That's where the trailer park was years ago. I know there are discussions going on right now about what happens with this road. It's my understanding it will probably terminate right here. There is also a road here, Tabernacle Trail. It's paved for first few feet, then it turns into a gravel road and goes back to the church back inside. That's also private. We're not guaranteed use of it. So the solutions that we're going to look at will show how we can deal with circulation vehicles in a way that doesn't use either one of these. But we'll continue to study them and go with the most cost-effective way moving forward. Refresher, we know that there were some streams on this property way back. This topo comes from many years ago. We suspect that there's a spring up in this area that produces water. We know from the soil borings, the boring that was taken right in this corner of the student parking area hit water at 4 feet under surface. So we want to stay out of these areas as best we can. A lot of cost associated with it. And we can pretty much assume that any soil located along those old stream beds is probably going to be something that will have a lot of clay in it. It may be expansive, but it's certainly something to avoid. Looking at the Powell property, there is this one little draw that goes right up through here in the southwestern corner that may have some issues, but we did not see those over in this area. So with that in mind, we're going to show you 3 options. These are not total building designs. Please don't think that's what they are. But they are organizational strategies for how we can put your school on the site. In all of these schemes, we propose to continue using the bus parking area as a place where buses arrive. We're also leaving the student parking alone. We want to put our money into the new school building and not rebuild things that you could use that are already there. So this scheme number 1, this is the ground level entry. The entry comes in from the eastern part of the site, from what's now student parking. In all of these schemes, the coloring is the same. The red is the administrative area. This scheme is organized along this one long pedestrian spine. Paul, probably call that Main Street, which is certainly what it is, because it's the main conductor, the main artery. We put all public spaces, for the most part, on this side of the building. You have your auditorium here. Kitchen gets its service from behind. Kitchen here with the serving in this area. Gymnasium is located here with locker rooms and maybe an auxiliary gym here on the building. There are 2 classrooms, I would call them wings, sometimes we call them Mars. Each of these is 3 stories, and the media center is, or library is located right here. Dining occurs along this main spine. The main spine bulges out, and the dining is out in the open. So chairs will be located along here, and we literally move through that dining area and use that as circulation going from classroom into classroom.
Ken, one other thing you might mention just about the site strategy is that while we are reusing all of the student parking, because this new site is so far removed from that lot that you are currently using as faculty parking, that in each of these strategies we've added some parking right there near the entrance to the school to accommodate faculty, visitors, your accessible parking for the handicap, trying to get that as close to the main entrance as possible, but incorporating a bit of a apparent drop-off scheme and some parking there on the site in close proximity to the main entrance.
All of these schemes will show a way to drive around the school. Fire officials require that these days. If it is only used by fire trucks, the meeting is narrowed as 20 feet. But if we're using it for deliveries to the kitchen, it will be wider.
Mr. Boyd,
Yes, sir.
did you say that the classrooms were 3 stories?
Yes, ma'am. In this scheme, these are all 3-story wings.
Mr. Boyd, this is Roy
We
Keith
have
again.
we can make them 2 stories if that's needed, but the expansion strategy would be to take this classroom and build out further. The core facilities would be built to accommodate more students than you have now. The big thing is, can you feed people? And do you have locker rooms adequate for a larger population? So we would add classrooms, and should you be so fortunate as to find out we have more students in the future than we have now. Music is located back here, music and choir, and possibly some art spaces back in this area. Art might also be taught over here. That's something that we'll dive into later. The lowest level, you would go down from that level to these 2 wings, and this somewhere, either in this area, or over here, would be that high base space for those CTE classes that absolutely have to be in the ground floor. And the upper level would, the top floor would connect with circulation, sorry about that, from the one classroom bar into the other.
Mr. Boyd,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Lloyd has a question for you before you go any further.
Sure.
Mr. Boyd, I'm looking at the dining. Well, 2 thoughts. One was about the dining. I know a lot of the designs that we had that were presented to us earlier had the ability for outside dining areas as well that were
Yep.
somewhat protected, and I didn't see that in that sketch.
It would be very difficult to get from the dining level out to this, because we would have to access that from below. This scheme doesn't show that, but the next one will.
Okay, I had another thought. In the current, well, back to the dining, one of the things that we had talked about before, and this goes back a few years, was making the dining room or the cafeteria set up more like like the mall setting where you have, different stations for dining, or maybe a sandwich station, a pizza station, or, again, more similar to a mall setup for dining.
Like food court?
Yes, sir. So that was something that was presented a few years ago that I know I was a big fan of. I like that option because one of the issues we have now, we have a short amount of time for the students to eat. And what I see, when you have that one station, by the time some students make it through the lunch line, I mean, the lunch period's almost over. So if you had the different stations where people could choose more of a variety of food options, I think it also would be a time savings for them as well. So that was just a thought on the cafeteria. And one more thought about the current design. I want to make sure that I'm reading this correctly. So if I'm looking at this current design, the one that you're showing, that would put the rear of your building where you're talking about your food truck, the entrance for the food trucks, facing Walmart. Is that correct? Facing your main highway?
Yeah, this is where the filling station is, and then to the north of this is Old Halifax Road, and of course you've got Walmart and Lowe's and
Yeah.
the whole string of that kind of activity on that side. So we've chosen to locate these buildings because the gym and auditorium spaces that would not require windows along here. So certainly the view in that direction isn't nearly as nice as the view is.
Okay. Yeah, I was just trying to picture, and it's hard to see without seeing the front of the building, but having the rear of the rear side of your building facing your main highway there. That's just that was my initial concern.
This is the rear. Why is the rear facing? Well, there's about 35 feet from here to there. Grade change. So we're not going to see this backside of this building from the filling station now. It's my understanding that there's a building coming in here that's going to be some kind of sports center structure. I doubt we'll even see this over top of that.
Okay. Thank you.
So your view is going to be from Old Halifax Road back to the front of the building here.
And also, when we design these schools, there's really no backside to the school. All the facades will be very well designed. They'll all have glass, so they'll all look like the front of the school. So there's really no backside to the building.
Mm-hmm. So looking at this in kind of a crude, very crude, three-dimensional format, these blue parts are the academic wings. This is the media center. This is your bus parking area. So students would come out and go into this wing to get into the school directly that way. This is the circle in front of the existing school. And of course, Old Halifax Road, it opens up very nicely. So you would have the view to the front of the school as you're approaching on Old Halifax Road. You would see the front door and intuitively understand how you park and get into the building. Now, we're probably going to have to do some reconfiguration in this area to align all of this stuff, but we haven't gotten to that yet. This is the other side of the building. This is from Old Halifax Road, looking down. There's the front door. We're actually in a bird's eye view above, and this is what it would look like as you drive down from Old Halifax Road. Does that help a little bit? Now these are just little blocks. We haven't gotten to the point where we're talking about fenestration and materiality of the sides. We're just looking at volumes at this point.
Madam Chair, I have a question or two.
Yes, sir, Mr. Potts.
First question is dealing with dropping the kids off by the parents sometime in the morning, or the parents coming to pick the kids up, that they always park in front of that building where they're not supposed to be parking. Are we gonna have that same type of situation with this?
Mr. Futz, I apologize, but I guess you're sitting a ways from the microphone, but I'm just not hearing
I'll be glad to
the
tell you.
question.
Okay, what I'm saying, the present thing what we have is when the parents are dropping the kids off, or the parents are
Parent drop off.
and
Yes, sir.
picking the kids up. We have people that come there to pick the kids up that park right in front of the school where it says no parking. Are we gonna have that same situation, or they gonna have to park out in the lot and come in there and get them?
They're gonna need their own lane. Right now, we go back a bit,
Okay,
there are 2 lanes coming down from right now, the student parking spaces all feed from this road coming in. There's no reason why they can't feed in from this side.
okay.
We could do that and utilize this for parent drop-off. We could avoid some of that confusion.
Okay.
Now, when they get to this point, whether they exit out through Old Halifax Road or whether they loop back around this way and go out, we have more study to do when we get to the pattern. But separating those parents dropping off kids from other people who are, certainly from the buses, is very important.
The other question is thank you. The other question is dealing with the 2 and 3 stories of the classroom space. Are we going to have elevators in there to accommodate people?
Yes, sir. You have to have an elevator in a 2-story building.
Okay, so we're gonna have,
Federal law.
okay. Well, it's federal law now too, but we don't have all that we should have, but anyway.
Yep, you have to have an elevator.
Right,
Yes.
right, so we need,
Cannot,
and they need to be,
cannot expect people to get up and down the stairs and
okay, so
ambulatory challenge.
are those gonna be separate from what students can possibly use as far as a handicapped person? Are they gonna all be combined together or what?
What was the question about?
All right, can you hear me now? Is that better?
That's a whole lot better.
Okay, so the size of the elevators is going to be able to be used for kids in chairs. Are they gonna be used where the chair gonna take up most of the space? Are we gonna have enough room for kids to be in there? Or are we gonna have elevators for the kids? I mean, because that's what somewhat what we have now. Some elevators are just for chairs and kids going up, and some elevators are for chairs and students. So, are we expecting?
Well, it's a policy decision you have to make. Elevators are generally for people who need them. I'm calling, you've seen any school system that has elevators for student use if they're not ambulatory challenged?
No, most of the elevators are keyed approach, so you have to use a key to get to them, and they're usually monitored by staff, and they're usually just for the people that are disabled. Now, I will tell you, based on the adjacencies of these 2 wings, you can see the 2 wings in the classroom bars, we would recommend actually 2 elevators, 1 in each wing.
Right. What
This
about
is another conversation for later in the design process, but elevators can be activated with proximity cards.
right?
And if you decide to go with the card control box, you can, just by changing the programming for a particular student, grant them access to an elevator or deny them access to an elevator. So if they, in that situation, if the student needed access, maybe not because they're ambulatory challenge, but without a science project, they need to get up to the top floor. You can grant them access for 2 days, 3 days, whatever is required to do that. The alternative is to issue a key, but you do have to control who can use that and not use that.
Thank you.
Let's look at a different solution. Number 2, option number 2. It's a pretty efficient layout. It's organized quite differently. This is what it looks like in the site plan. It has a spine that runs this way. This is your front door from the student parking area. You come in, The dining area is open, and it's not walled off from other things. It does provide what we sometimes, as architects, call pre-assembly space to get into either the gymnasium or into the auditorium. So if you have a large crowd arriving for a play, or you've got that 3,500 people coming to see the GW basketball game, they have some opportunity to mingle in the dining area before they go in. And at halftime, you can set up popcorn sales to them, whatever you want to in the dining room. Admin is located here at the front door. With all these schemes, we want admin located so that when you come in, after hours, these doors get locked and you have to go through admin to get in the building. In this scheme, the auditorium is set up so that if we had that flat area, which would occur from about where the cursor is back this way, you can have a side door to go into the auditorium, with the primary entry here, one to that lower level that could function as that forum that Mr. Lewis had talked about. And the back part could either be one large meeting space or could be broken into two classrooms. We've located art here and music and choral here. There's probably going to be a little bit of grade along the side, and these can withstand being built into the mill better than art, but art could have some glass looking out front as you arrive. To come back this way, we've actually broken these two cars so that when you look down here, you don't see one long corridor. You can see here have a small bit of collaboration space. It's not over the top, very modest. Service to the kitchen is at this level. In the last scheme, it was here. There's a lot of grade up on the side. This probably will work out a little better in terms of bringing the truck in without a lot of grading. This is the lower level. We go down a stair and arrive at the lower level. And this would be the entry level where students are arriving by bus. Buses, we of course have to reconfigure some of this to make that feel like it's the promenade it needs to be, but the buses we park here will be coming in. And then we have an upper room. One thing that's different about this scheme is in the upper level we have the library or media center as we call it. This corridor would extend over, could connect back this way, but in this scheme we actually connect to the top level for the gymnasium, and you could, if you wish, connect to the top level of the auditorium for a balcony, or we could put a control booth here and control the lights from an upper level. Massing-wise, this is sort of what this looks like. The classroom academic area along here, we would get those high base spaces somewhere on this lower side, probably here. The dining room has access to the exterior. You have the possibility to create outdoor dining right here. This courtyard is quite protected, quite quiet. You can access it either from this main corridor or from the dining room. Looking back towards Old Halifax Road, looking from Old Halifax Road down, the front door is here. If these are art classes, they could find their way into these classroom bars and this not being. That's something we're still studying. And this is what that entry would look like. I think it lost some of the effect of the angle in this scheme because it looks a lot better in a drawing than it does in this modern view. But nonetheless, a front door that you can find and intuitively know how to get into the building without having to have a map. So moving along to option number 3, very different kind of building. We like to give people choices. In this building, this is the ground level. It has this wedge-shaped dining area located in here and along pedestrian spine. Auditorium is located here at the back. Admin is here up front where you can go through if required. But the gym is the thing that's quite different on this building. It is actually located on the floor of the club. So when you enter from here, you actually enter on that upper concourse level. 2 classroom wings back here with the meetings. So in this scheme, the gym actually gets like a gym lobby. So if you're arriving for an evening function for a basketball game, you may come in this way. Students would arrive here, go up this ceremonial stair to get to the upper level. This one classroom bar has classes on this lower level, but this one does not. Upper level would look something like this. We have 2 classrooms that connect back with this corridor, and this is an open well to meetings here below. Looking at this 3-dimensionally, this is looking as if you're in the air over Tabernacle Road. I'm up in the helicopter looking down. This is what it would look like from Tabernacle Road, Tabernacle Trail, I should say. This is what it looks like from Old Halifax Road, looking from that direction, and this is sort of ahead of the front door. So, 3 different strategies for putting the high school program on the site. I can tell you that this one's probably going to be the largest. These 2 are about the same size. And I'm curious to hear what you have to say. I'm going to shut up and listen.
This is Lacey. I think my personal opinion, option 1, having the classes separated, I don't like that quite so much. And just the layout of the long aisle.
I can't hear anything of what you're saying.
Is this a little better? All right, so option 1 would probably not be my favorite just because of the way the classrooms are so far apart between the 2 wings there and the long aisle going from one end of the building to the other from the parking area. Option 2, I think, gives you a little bit more of a courtyard type option, and I do like that one a little bit better. Personally, I think option 3, I really like the option of having the gym at the front. I think it would make a nice front, nice entrance for sporting. Then you also have the side entrance that has the admin and normal entrance for students, just a little more easily accessible by the community, and still allowing a courtyard over between the classes on the left side of option 3. That's my first opinion in looking at the designs.
I really didn't hear much of that. I had to say
Well,
that.
I feel like I did, so if I could recap, it sounded like you said option 1 was not your favorite because the 2 classroom wings are so far apart and the main corridor is just so long from front to back.
Right.
I think those are good critiques of that option, and we actually had been studying one where if you imagine that sort of rose-colored dining area, instead of being such a long arc, we've been compressing it into a tighter, sort of more like a half circle that brings the top 2 ends of those 2 classroom legs, brings them closer together. So we agree with that criticism and think that scheme can be improved to bring the 2 classroom bars closer together. Mm-hmm. The long distance between one end, the full length of that corridor, that's probably less flexible. It kind of is what it is. There may be ways to shorten that up a little bit as we dive deeper into, the real program and everything, but I do think we have some ways to address your first criticism right off the bat and improve that scheme. Option 2, you said that you had generally had a favorable reaction to this one. I understood you to say that you like the sort of courtyard aspect, and I wasn't sure if you were talking about the front courtyard or the back courtyard or both, but I understood you to indicate that that was sort of a positive that you saw in this scheme, that those two courtyard-like areas could be developed into something nice. And then finally, that option 3, the advantages you saw there was that the gym having its own separate entrance, that the main school also had its main entrance, then I lost some of what you said there, but in conclusion, I think you said that your preference was for option 3. That all sound right?
Yes, that was a very good summary.
Mr. Boyd, this is Roy Keith again. Does option 3 have like an outside dining space? I didn't hear that.
It does not.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
So the approach to dining can have a lot of flexibility with any of these. The degree to which all of the dining, some school systems, we're designing a high school for Stafford right now, where they're really taking the size of the dining space down pretty small, envisioning that students are going to be able to eat wherever they want and throughout the school. And so there's opportunities for informal eating spaces throughout the school. Certainly any of these schemes can have outside areas that would be outfitted or furnished for outdoor dining. But the big difference is that, whereas option 1, you might not have immediate access to outdoor dining, at least you have views to outdoors. Option 2, you could have immediate access to outdoor dining, whereas option 3 is the one where because the dining is in the heart of the school, there is no immediate access to outdoor dining. At that point, you'd have to go outside the school to some area to dine, but there's no adjacency there.
Okay, and when I keep mentioning outside dining, I should also say like outside learning area as well. So I see that as a multi-purpose, where you could dine outside, but you would also have some opportunities for an outside learning stations as well. Maybe it's graded down to, where you have someone lecturing at one level and people sitting, on an elevated, like hillside or something. Yeah, like an amphitheater, so to speak.
You get that?
Would there be, like option 3, would there be an option to move the media center that's there in green to the side a little bit or something maybe, and move the dining area over? Would that be something that might be feasible with that layout?
Would it be possible for whoever's closest to the microphone to restate the comments that are being made? It's just, I apologize, but it's just, I've got my volume all the way up and it's just really hard to understand your comments.
Yeah, I think we need to use the portable microphones instead of the plugged-in ones. So the question was whether or not the media center in option 3, I believe that's the section in green, is there opportunity to rearrange that with the dining area a little bit that's in the purple, so that would have outdoor access there, so maybe moving the media center to the other side?
We could explore something like that, see if there's a way that media and dining could change their configurations to bring the dining to that portion that would have more immediate connection to the outside. We could explore that.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir. Yes.
I have a couple of questions. On option number 3, there's a gap between the two sections that for classes. Can that be used, or can that be blocked off for something in there so the kids can have access where they don't have access, either for dining or whatever? or theater thing, whatever we're talking about, trying to do outside the amphitheater or whatever.
Are you talking about the inside space between the academic wings or the outside space? Talking about this area?
Right.
This area?
Right, that area.
Talking about the outside?
Right.
Yes, I think so. So the lower of those two classroom bars, its lowest story sits one story lower than the other classroom. If we flip back to option 3's plans, we can see, so at the lowest level, you have just this one classroom bar, and then you start climbing that hill, so you get to the next level, and then you have at the next story up, you have both classroom bars. So you can understand how that green area in between the two classroom bars is sloping down toward the lower. So you could certainly have some sort of a outdoor learning amphitheater in that space.
Okay. Second question, got two more. This one, what do you mean by media center? What's
Library.
oh, that kind of, okay.
The library is often grouped together with the sort of technology hub of the school. Oftentimes your main distribution center is with the library. A lot of your AV storage and AV repair is often, your IT specialist is often closely aligned with the activities of the library director. And so often those activities get grouped together. Oftentimes there's a computer lab right next to the library. So they all sort of work together. We call that a media center.
We've seen some schools that have gaming teams to compete against students in other schools in video games. And those gaming centers are quite often located.
I'm interested in not only what you're saying on that, but I'm also interested in what we can do as far as training kids to operate audio-visual machines and being able to do all the same things that are being done in TV stations, close to that. Not the exact same thing, but close to it. So they'll get some type of media training that I'm looking at media training there. I like being able to do videos, TikTok, whatever they wanted to do, with reason, of course, and have the experience of maybe they can learn how to do that stuff while they're in school, because we don't do anything about, we need to have some kids that are available that can film the basketball games, that can film the baseball games, the softball games, the soccer games, to film everything. I want everything filmed. I even want us filmed over here. That's really scary about it here with me. But that's what we need to be looking to. When I envision a media center, I want to encompass that complete concept of what a media center should be, and that's include the audio-visual aspect of it as well. Where we can train somebody. Is that possible to incorporate that in there with making some space available for that type of doing?
It's not at all unusual for a high school to have a small, what I call it a TV studio.
Right.
It's not, what we say in the big cities, a TV studio.
Right, I'm not
It's also not at all uncommon for principals to make public announcement over that. Now that probably means your classes shift from smart boards to flat screens. But it's very possible to do that.
Okay. Hopefully we'll look at that. Secondly, outside, nobody said anything yet, but I've been thinking about it in all three observations or all three options. Security. So how are people not gonna be able to enter my school in one of those wings right there, or any wings, all of them facing to the outside. All those doors locked, all those doors set up where the kids can't leave them cracked or without an alarm going off in central office or something to make sure we don't have that. Because, people, if there's a way to get in, people will definitely find it.
It's very easy to make doors exit only.
Okay.
And, only have people leave the building points where you want them. You do have to have fire exits in a lot of places, but that fire door does not have to have a handle on it on the outside when you can get back in. Of course, the PE classes have to get outside, and they have to get back in.
Right.
But limiting the number of ways to get in and out is, that really helps. You got a lot of doors in your existing school.
But particularly when we let kids out, when we expect them to come back in, they're going to be under supervision. So therefore, the principals or the principal, but the teachers or somebody should have the key to open the door to let them back in. So, but other than the key being provided to them, to those particular teachers for those classes that have to go outside, all our doors should be exit only. Am I right or wrong?
That's pretty commonly the way it's done, that you limit the number of doors to the exterior to the greatest degree possible allowed by code and allowed by your needs. And then all the doors that you can, that you don't absolutely have to have hardware on the outside, you just don't put hardware on the outside. Access is typically by card reader. Your teachers and staff will have a card that they can swipe that allows them to get back into the door, but if you don't have a card, you're not getting in that door.
And it also keeps a record of everybody that swipes a card on that, like say after hours or something?
That's right.
Okay.
Yep. And if a door is left in an open condition, if it's propped open, you have a contact switch at every door that sounds an alarm. That alarm can either be audible everywhere, or it can just signal to an enunciator in the main office, letting somebody know that a door has been left open. That's up to you. Those programs, those security programs, have a tremendous amount of flexibility to alert you in the way you need to be alerted that a door is open somewhere.
In all of these schemes, we would want to create ways that the classroom areas can be shut off. In option one, we would be looking at putting doors here and here, so people coming to basketball games or play would have access to this area and public areas, but not these wings. In option two, we would actually put it along here, and just have one set of doors and everything on this side is shut off. So people coming in would have access to these public spaces, and that's it. Option three is a little more challenging because it has a couple of ways in. We can shut off these pieces, but they would be able to go up and down in these zones.
Mr. Camp?
Jim?
Camp.
Jay, yes, sir. Three things. One is, how many doors are in each of these options? How many doors are in each one of them? Do you know right offhand?
We can do that for you.
Okay. Secondly, are all of these within the 250,000 square foot parameter that we're dealing with?
These two are. This one is not.
Okay. Okay. And my last question is, are any of these designs anywhere where we can go put eyes on it? And
This is a variation of Louisa.
yeah.
This isn't exactly Louisa, but
Okay.
some of the elements of Louisa are incorporated in this.
Right.
These two are complete originals, and I don't know where there's.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Do you or Steve know where there's something similar to one of these?
No, they're absolutely unique
Right.
designs that we just come up with for this site. There's nothing like them.
Yeah, I mean, the one option two is the closest one to Louisa, obviously, but the option 1 and 3 are pretty unique for Halifax.
As far as the square footage, I would say at this level, we're at this sort of party site strategy, colored, cartoony thumbnail kind of approach, where we're trying to talk about big moves on the site. How do you like this part of the building here versus this part of the building over here? If there was a lot of support for option one, we would immediately be pursuing option one in the way to make that the most efficient
it can be square footage wise. If there was a lot of support for option 3, same thing. We would immediately start working to make that the most efficient it could be in terms of its use of the square footage. So currently, with those 3 diagrams, while that option 3 is slightly larger than the other 2, we wouldn't just throw up our hands. You know, we would definitely start working very diligently to make sure it came in at the square footage it needed to be.
Right.
And quite frankly, Steve, I don't want to, speak out of school here, but all 3 of these options are very close to your 250,000 gross square feet where you need to be or less.
That's this one. This
Not
one's
that one.
283,000.
Oh, I didn't know that one. Okay.
This one's 50,000 square feet more than this one.
Oh, wow.
And there's like, and it's of course, it's a very well proven estimate of size.
Yes. Okay.
This is 245, this is 232, this is the
Yeah.
smallest,
Yeah.
and this is the big volume right here.
Gotcha. Well,
Yeah,
obviously, size is money, so.
It is.
Right.
I'd really like to see the option 3 condensed a little bit more, that big wedge in the middle there. With the media center, if there was a way to condense that side to side, maybe we can make that smaller. Because I think the layout, that's my preference from a layout, but it does look like there's a much larger dining area there. Maybe there's a way to condense that down.
And Mr. Boyd, this is Roy Keith again. I would also like to see on those, in the classroom size, to make sure that the hallways, that we do have those collaborative spaces that we've been discussing. I know you mentioned that some of those had smaller collaborative spaces, but from the beginning, that's been one attractive aspect of the new school design.
I think I heard part of it. Steve, did you hear all that?
No, I'm sorry, I did not.
Roy Keith,
go,
I
take two. Can you
apologize.
hear me?
It's just so hard to do.
That's okay, take 2. Can you hear me now?
That's why we're getting.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I know you mentioned this a few moments ago on the designs that some of the collaborative spaces and the halls may have been condensed. I would love to see if there's any ability to offer as much of that space as possible when you're designing the classroom wings, for lack of a better word. I would just like to make sure that we still emphasize those collaborative spaces when possible.
Yeah, we're in total agreement with you, absolutely. Yep.
Mr. Boyd, can you hear me? This is Kathy Fraley.
I do.
Okay. Have a question about option 3. Is there a way that the instructional areas can be moved closer together?
These 2?
Yes,
Well, you've got glass along here.
Glass.
You've got glass along here, so they're looking at each other.
okay, okay.
You know, if you get too close, that's what comes with distraction. It's not to say that you can't locate all of your toilets and things of that nature in this corner to kind of soften that effect. But you're thinking about how long it takes to walk from here, actually, all the way out here, to go from a class on the lowest level here, to go up the stair, come around, and go up the stair to go to a class over here.
Yeah, that would take a little bit of time.
Yeah, it's a bit of a hike.
I'm just, okay. Yeah, let's just take our time here. That's right. Can't do that.
Now, I will add that we don't have the actual topographic survey yet, so we're working on GIS maps, and they're very helpful to kind of know where hills are, but they're not very helpful to tell you what the exact elevation of the soil is. So all 3 of us need to be affected by the final topographic plan. And we're pushing it.
You have any other questions, guys?
I got one more.
Okay, Mr. Camp?
Jim, this is Jay, can you hear me?
I hear you just fine.
Okay, Like the question that Ms. Fraley just asked, going from the bottom on option 3, is there some type of software where we can actually do a virtual walk from?
Eventually, yes.
Okay. So
But not right now.
Okay.
As we build these in a building information model program, we use a program called Revit.
Right.
But once we get these into, we probably only do one of these.
Okay.
As we get to that point, when we're starting to build final drawings, yes, we can then take a walk through and see all the spaces and understand far greater detail what that space means.
Right, because I was thinking about maybe looking at, maybe doing option 1, looking at option 1 and option 3, but, you know, I wouldn't mind getting in a car and riding to Louisa myself and checking that out, so, you know, just some perspective from the inside, that's all.
Well, Louisa's a little bit different. The classroom area is just one long rectangle, but it has a loop corridor. This is a little thinner design. The loop corridor, there are rooms in the middle that have no light. That's where all the toilets and storage rooms, and I think there were some computer labs and things like that in the middle. So those wings are much wider than they are. Louisa, the advent's actually on the back side of the building. It has an entry volume, but you have to go, which has security. You go through that, and then cross the corridor, and advent and counseling are back here. So it's a little bit different, but it has these 2 spaces off the dining, that's the same. So it has this, the bridge going across on the upper level. Louisa's gym doesn't have an entry on the upper level, but the auditorium does. So it's similar, but the classroom area will look quite different. We don't have to break things apart, but by doing this, if you're standing here, if you're looking at a corridor that long, it can look like it does forever, but by having a break in the middle, it breaks down the scale some.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Anything else? All right, Mr. Boyd, the board does not have any further questions, I don't believe. We thank you and your folks for giving us this presentation. He didn't hear me, did he?
Any time out on an afternoon to come in and meet with us. We learned a great deal. I think this has been a very valuable meeting. Greatly appreciate your accommodating requests.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mike, do y'all have any questions?
No, sir, thank you.
Doc?
Some kind of building.
So,
No, I'm good, thank you.
you good?
Yeah, I do have a question. I mean, obviously, I'm going to follow up with him. This is just a kickoff. If you all would put together any concerns, comments, and send them to me, I can kind of coalesce them. Because obviously, we need to have more meetings. They need to schedule meetings with Michael, his team, stakeholders for the community, law enforcement, food service. There's all pieces of the puzzle that have to be, they have to have a piece of this. So it can be a community high school. But I think you guys need to percolate a little bit about what you heard and then kind of digest it to me so I can give him some feedback.
Do we have a copy of that presentation?
I don't, but I can get one. And would you all like for me to grab one so that you can mull over it as well?
Yes.
Soft copy's fine for me.
Okay. Yeah, I'll get you something. I'll follow up tomorrow and have a debriefing with him. And it would really be helpful for what you want to say after you've thought about it. Give me your gut feeling. I'm going to tell you, unsolicited, I don't think this worked that well via Zoom. I think that the technological problems of hearing, that lengthened the meeting. I don't think they have a problem coming and being here with you. I think that might serve a little bit better. I don't know how you all felt. I know that this was an idea to try to save time and get more meetings in, but I don't know if it worked that well. You guys tell me.
I'd rather in person myself.
In person, yeah.
So, okay, I'll debrief with them tomorrow, but do me the favor and give me your unabridged comments.
Okay. Okay. All right, do we want to go into closed session at this point? Mrs. Shotwell, do you have, because I didn't come prepared.
Pursuant to section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia, I move that the following, that the board convene a
Yeah,
closed
I
meeting for the
arranged it.
purpose of considering the following specific matters. Personnel, the appointment, resignation, salaries, and performance of specific division employees as authorized by section 2.2-3711.1 of the Code of Virginia.
Okay. All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Go into closed session, please. We'll take about